Welcome to Fireside History, where the past comes to life. If you enjoy this retelling, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to hear more. The Terracotta Warriors, the eternal army of Emperor Qin Shi Huang. Shaanxi province on the outskirts of a small village called Xi'an, China, 1974. The earth was hard that spring, dry, cracked from months without rain. Shaanxi province lay under a pale sky, the sun hanging low like a lantern behind a veil of dust. This was the land of emperors, silk caravans and forgotten tombs, but to the farmers who lived here in 1974, it was simply home. Rows of wheat and sorghum stretched across the plains, broken by the occasional willow, their leaves trembling in the warm wind. On the outskirts of a small village called Xi'an, a group of men worked beneath that relentless sky. Their tools were simple: picks, spades, wicker baskets for hauling earth. They weren't archaeologists nor treasure hunters. They were digging for water. The drought had been cruel, and the village's wells had run dry. If they could just sink a new shaft deep enough, perhaps the earth would yield what the heavens withheld. One of the men, a wiry farmer named Yang Zhifa, swung his pick into the stubborn soil. He paused now and then to wipe the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, scanning the horizon. The air was heavy with the scent of sun-baked loam, and the sound of the wind carried faint whispers through the fields, as though the land itself was holding its breath. By the third day of work, the pit was beginning to take shape. It was narrow and deep, the walls streaked with layers of ancient compacted earth. Yang's shovel struck something hard, not the satisfying ring of stone, nor the dull thud of buried wood. This was a sharper sound, hollow, faintly resonant. He crouched, brushing the soil away with his fingers. A fragment emerged, pale, curved, unnervingly smooth. At first he thought it was bone, but as more of it came to light, he saw the faint traces of carving. The lines were deliberate, confident, the mark of a hand long vanished from the world. The others gathered round, muttering in dialect. A broken lid from a burial jar, some village ancestor's tomb. Yet as Yang freed the object, its weight and texture told a different story. This was terracotta, fired clay, and the fragment was shaped like part of a face. What Yang did not know was that beneath his feet lay one of the most extraordinary archaeological finds of the 20th century. 2 millennia earlier, this land had been chosen by the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, as the resting place for his immortal ambitions. He had ruled a united China for barely a decade before his death in 210 BCE, but in that short span he had reshaped history, standardizing scripts and coinage, commanding vast armies and building roads that stitched the empire together. His tomb, sealed in secrecy, was said to be guarded by rivers of mercury and treasures beyond imagining. The pit Yang had opened was just one corner of the emperor's vast subterranean domain, and the pale fragment in his hands, it was a whisper from an army that had not seen the light in over 2,000 years. In 1974, the political climate in China was cautious. The Cultural Revolution was still winding down, and archaeology was a delicate pursuit. Yet local authorities, curious about the find, sent word to the county museum in Lintong. Within weeks, a small team of archaeologists arrived, their battered trucks rumbling down dusty tracks into the village. The lead archaeologist, Zhao Kangmin, was a man of quiet conviction and sharp eyes. He had spent years documenting the region's relics, many of them scavenged or destroyed in the turmoil of recent decades. When he examined the fragment from Yang's well, he saw the fine craftsmanship, the crispness of the eyelid, the curve of the cheek. This was no common funerary statue. Zhao asked the farmers to show him the pit. As they stood on its edge, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of freshly turned soil. He peered down into the excavation and spotted more. The curve of a terracotta shoulder, the faint suggestion of armor scales etched into the clay. The work that followed was slow, deliberate, almost reverent. The archaeologists had only shovels, trowels, and brushes, but their greatest tool was patience. Each layer of soil was removed by hand, each fragment mapped and numbered. The earth was dense with time, compressing centuries into mere inches. Every scrape of a trowel was like turning a page in a buried chronicle. They uncovered a head, life-sized, its features startlingly individual. The brows were furrowed, the lips set in quiet determination. No two soldiers, Zhao realized, were alike. Each had been modelled as a distinct man, as though the artisans of Qin had known them personally. By the end of the first week, the pit revealed legs, torsos, the bases of figures still locked in the soil. Their formation was military, deliberate, a battle line frozen in time. Bronze spearheads gleamed faintly in the half-light, the green patina a testament to centuries underground. The villagers began to speak of the dig in hushed tones. Children lingered at the edges of the site, eyes wide. Some of the older folk muttered warnings. The emperor's tomb was a place of power, and disturbing it might bring misfortune. But the work continued, for the weight of history pressed too heavily to be ignored. The days grew hotter. The soil, once cool in the early mornings, baked hard by midday, and the archaeologists worked with cloths tied around their heads to shield them from the glare. Their fingers ached from scraping clay, yet every new find was a surge of adrenaline. One morning, a worker's spade rang against something larger than the rest. Clearing the soil, they revealed the full figure of a warrior, standing over 6 feet tall, his face stern beneath a sculpted moustache, his hands positioned as though gripping a long-lost weapon. The detail was astonishing. Every plate of his armour, every fold in his tunic, captured in fired clay. Zhao stood before it, the enormity of the find settling on his shoulders. This was no isolated statue. This was an army. By the close of the second week, the trench was alive with activity. Figures emerged shoulder to shoulder, their stances suggesting ranks that extended far beyond the edges of the pit. The more they uncovered, the more questions pressed in. How many soldiers were here? How far did the formation stretch? And what else lay hidden in the emperor's long-lost necropolis? Yet with each discovery came risk. The terracotta, after centuries in stable darkness, was fragile in the open air. The painted pigments that still clung to the figures, brilliant reds, purples and blues, began to flake away within minutes of exposure, the colour vanishing like breath on glass. The team worked frantically to photograph and record each detail before it was lost. On the morning of the 18th day, the dig reached a turning point. Yang Jifa, now working alongside the archaeologists, lifted a clod of earth to reveal the polished tip of a bronze blade. It was sharp even after 2,000 years, the edge catching the sunlight. This was a weapon meant for war, yet buried here in silence. Zhao took it in his hands, feeling the cool metal, the perfect balance. His mind raced. If the soldiers had been armed, what else might be buried with them? The pit seemed to breathe around them, the rows of silent warriors watching as the modern world chipped away at the veil between past and present. And then someone's spade struck something hollow, deep beneath the rank of warriors, a sound like a muffled drum. Everyone froze. The sound was unmistakable, a hollow resonance that didn't belong to stone or compacted earth. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The sun pressed down, cicadas droning in the stillness, until one of the workers knelt and began brushing away the soil with trembling hands. As the dirt fell away, the shape of a wooden beam emerged, its surface darkened with age. Time had eaten into it, leaving it brittle at the edges, but its purpose was clear. A support structure, part of something larger. Zhao Kangmin knelt beside it, his mind leaping ahead. This wasn't just a scatter of statues. They had uncovered architecture, the remains of a chamber that had been deliberately built, then sealed. With cautious strokes, the team widened the exposure. More beams appeared, forming a grid beneath the terracotta ranks, each beam supporting layers of packed earth and reed matting. This was how the ancient builders had protected their clay army. A subterranean parade ground, roofed over and hidden from the world. When they broke through the first section, the truth of its scale became clear. The beam marked the edge of a vast hall. A trench stretching out far beyond the reach of their shovels, its floor lined with warriors standing at attention, row after row, rank after rank. Their formation was precise, as though awaiting the Emperor's command even now. Zhao felt the breath catch in his chest. This was no burial pit in the casual sense. This was a garrison, an entire military division entombed for eternity. The work grew more methodical, more reverent. Every figure they freed seemed to deepen the mystery. Here was an archer, kneeling with one knee to the ground, his bowstring long since rotted away, but his posture still taut, ready. There, a cavalryman. His clay hands curved as if holding reins, his mount long crumbled into dust. The individuality of the faces was unnerving. One soldier's expression was calm, almost meditative. Another scowled beneath a heavy brow. Some had the youthful fullness of new recruits. Others bore the lined cheeks of veterans. These were not generic effigies, they were portraits. To work in these pits was to live in 2 centuries at once. Above ground, the world was modern. Red flag trucks parked by the roadside, the faint crackle of a portable radio tuned to the evening news. But below, the air was thick and cool, filled with the scent of ancient earth and clay dust. Every step stirred whispers of history. The tools were humble but precise. Bamboo scrapers, soft brushes, trowels worn smooth from use. The archaeologists knelt for hours, coaxing detail from the soil. The silence was broken only by murmured instructions, the occasional clink of metal on stone, or the sigh of an artifact being lifted from its grave. In these moments, the distance between the modern workers and the Qin artisans seemed to shrink. One could almost imagine the clang of ancient hammers, the hiss of the kiln, the low murmur of craftsmen discussing the set of a jawline or the curve of a pauldron. The deeper they dug, the more the scale of the project became unfathomable. Zhao began to suspect, and later evidence would confirm, that the Emperor had not ordered a mere 1,000 soldiers. This army would number in the thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, infantry, archers, cavalry, generals, each rendered with meticulous detail, each standing in ordered ranks as though ready to march into the afterlife. This was not only an expression of power, it was a vision of eternity. The Emperor had believed that his reign should not end with death, and so he had recreated his empire underground. The Terracotta Army was both protection and proclamation. Midway through the 3rd week, another layer of mystery surfaced, fragments of painted wood, delicate and blackened. As they pieced them together, the archaeologists realized they were unearthing war chariots. Bronze fittings lay scattered among the shards, along with the remains of clay horses. Even in ruin, the craftsmanship was staggering. Reins moulded from clay, horsehair patterns carved into the manes, nostrils flared as if mid-charge. It was hard to reconcile the quiet of the pit with the violence these figures evoked. One could stand in that subterranean hall, surrounded by warriors, and feel the ghost of a battlefield. The thundering hooves, the shouted orders, the clash of bronze on bronze. By now, word of the discovery had spread beyond the county. Officials arrived from Xi'an, their shoes caked with red dust as they stepped down into the pits. They stood in silence, faces pale in the half-light, confronted by the sheer gravity of the find. Plans were drawn for wider excavations, but such work required resources and permission from higher authorities. Zhao knew that while the dig had begun as a local effort, it was rapidly becoming a matter of national significance. The challenge was not only in uncovering the warriors, but in protecting them. The paint that once covered the figures, brilliant as the uniforms of a living army, was still visible in sheltered creases, vermilion reds, deep indigos, emerald greens. Yet the moment those colours met the air, they faded and peeled away. The archaeologists worked quickly to record every shade before it vanished forever. Then came a moment that left the pit breathless. One of the workers clearing earth from the base of a warrior's legs found that the soil beneath was softer than expected. As they dug, they uncovered a slope leading downwards, not part of the current chamber, but the mouth of another. The trench descended into shadow, and the air that drifted up was cool, with a faint metallic tang. Zhao ordered the work to halt. This was dangerous. The supports here were old, and the earth could collapse without warning. Yet the temptation to look to see what lay beyond was overwhelming. Lamps were brought. The light spilled into the sloping passage, illuminating more clay feet, more ranks stretching away into darkness. It was as if the army marched on without end. For a long moment no one spoke. The enormity of it pressed down on them. The emperor had built not a tomb, but a world hidden beneath farmland, awaiting rediscovery like some buried empire from legend. And yet every inch forward meant disturbing what had been untouched for over 2,000 years. There was awe in the air, but also an unspoken fear. Because if this was only one part of the necropolis, what else might still be sleeping below? The decision to press deeper into that sloping passage was not made lightly. Zhao Kangmin knew each step risked collapse, but he also knew what was at stake. History was waiting. The first few meters were slow going. Soil was cleared by hand, beams reinforced with fresh timber. The light from the kerosene lamps trembled against the walls, revealing more warriors, their eyes levelled forward, their stances unbroken despite the centuries. The further they went, the more it became clear. The chamber they had thought immense was merely one section of a greater complex. Over the following months, excavations spread outward like ripples in a pond. What emerged was staggering. Pit 1, the first and largest, stretched over 200 metres in length and housed thousands of infantry in battle formation. Pit 2 revealed a combination of cavalry, archers, and chariots. Pit 3, smaller yet commanding, appeared to be the headquarters, the command post of this ghostly army. Each pit told its own story. The cavalry stood alongside their clay steeds, saddles carved with meticulous care. Archers knelt with their crossbows, the bronze mechanisms so well preserved that they could still fire. In the command pit, generals loomed taller than their troops, their armour ornate, their faces carved with the authority of men accustomed to obedience. The soldiers' arrangement was not symbolic pageantry, it was military science. Qin Shi Huang's underground army mirrored the discipline and tactics that had conquered all of China. By now, the dig had attracted the attention of Beijing. Teams of archaeologists, conservators, and historians arrived. Specialists devised new methods to stabilize the figures as they emerged, wrapping them in protective sheeting to preserve what pigment remained. Laboratories were set up nearby, and each artifact was catalogued with meticulous detail. international whispers began to circulate. The Terracotta Army, hidden for over 2 millennia, was being called the eighth wonder of the world. For China, it was a rediscovery, not just of an artifact, but of an origin story. The first emperor, once a figure of legend and fear, now stood again in the public eye, his ambitions laid bare in clay and bronze. Yet the excavation also deepened the mystery of the tomb itself. Historical texts spoke of the emperor's mausoleum, a great burial mound to the west of the pits. The mausoleum of Qin Shi Huang has long been wrapped in a shroud of legend, a blend of recorded history and whispered folklore that has endured for over 2,000 years. Ancient chronicles, particularly Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian, speak of a subterranean palace larger and more elaborate than any earthly court. According to these accounts, the emperor commanded that his tomb contain scale models of his empire, complete with mountains, rivers, and seas fashioned from precious metals. The rivers were said to flow with mercury, shimmering like liquid silver, under a ceiling inlaid with pearls to represent the stars. The chambers were lit by oil lamps, fueled with whale fat, designed to burn for eternity. Surrounding it all, traps were rumoured to have been set, automatic crossbows hidden in the walls, primed to fire on any intruder, their strings still taut after centuries in darkness. These stories painted the mausoleum as less a tomb and more a fortified underworld, a final redoubt from which the first emperor would rule in death as he had in life. It is precisely because of these legends and the risks they imply that the central tomb has remained sealed. Scientific surveys have confirmed extraordinarily high concentrations of mercury in the soil above the burial mound, lending weight to the ancient descriptions, but also posing serious health hazards to any excavation team. The engineering of the chamber itself is unknown. The sheer weight of earth pressing down, combined with the possibility of booby traps and structural collapse, could mean that one wrong move would destroy both the artifacts and the tomb's integrity forever. Conservationists also fear that the sudden exposure to air, light, and humidity would cause catastrophic deterioration to organic materials, pigments, and delicate constructions that have survived in stable conditions for over 2 millennia. In the end, the decision to leave the mausoleum unopened is as much about respect for its mysteries as it is about science, an acceptance that some treasures must remain in darkness until the means to protect them matches the ambition that created them. For the villagers of Xi'an, life was forever altered. The fields where they had once planted grain were transformed into a protected archaeological site. The farmers who had first struck clay with their shovels found themselves written into history, their names forever tied to the discovery. For Zhao Kangmin there was pride, but also a measure of sorrow. He had unearthed a marvel, yet in doing so he had watched its colours fade in the open air, the vibrancy of a vanished age slipping away faster than it could be saved. Every archaeologist learns this truth. To touch the past is also, in some way, to lose it. The first public exhibitions in the late 1970s drew crowds in their millions. Visitors would walk into the pit, viewing halls, and stop in their tracks, overwhelmed by the sight. Before them stretched a vision so improbable it defied belief. Rank upon rank of warriors, each unique, each carved with a level of human detail that made them feel alive. And in that moment, the distance between ancient Qin and the modern world seemed to dissolve. People spoke in hushed voices. Some stood for hours, simply looking. Because here was not only a triumph of craftsmanship, here was the echo of an empire's heartbeat. In the years since, the Terracotta Army has become one of the most iconic archaeological sites on Earth, yet its true scale is still unknown. Vast sections of the necropolis remain buried, preserved under the same blanket of earth that shielded them for over 2,000 years. The decision to leave much of it untouched is deliberate. Future generations may have tools and methods that we do not, and the past is a patient thing. What was uncovered in 1974 began with a drought, a farmer's shovel, and a sound in the earth that did not belong. It ended, or rather began anew, with the revelation of a world built for eternity. Standing at the edge of Pit 1 today, the air cool despite the crowds, you can feel it. That same quiet pressure in the chest that Yang Jifa must have felt when he brushed the soil from that first fragment of a face. The weight of 2,000 years pressing in, not to bury but to bear witness. Because the Terracotta Army is more than an archaeological wonder. It is a testament to ambition without limit, and to the strange, enduring ways in which the past refuses to stay buried. Thank you for listening to Fireside History. If this story moved you, please like, comment and subscribe. Your support helps keep the fire burning.